For 10 years, I woke up for just one day, this day. For 10 years, I lived with one thought, to destroy Kang Min Hyuk. I knew what he looked like, how he spoke, how he smiled when he lied. I knew what I would say when I saw him for the first time. But that day, in the courtroom, nothing went according to plan. He didn't look guilty. He wasn't scared, arrogant, or indifferent. He looked at me as if he had long known I would come. And he was waiting. Confident. Calm. Dangerous. There was no fear in his gaze, but I saw no guilt either. Only one single question, which he didn't say out loud, but I read between the lines. And from that moment, everything began to crack. I am Lee So-yeon, and I am a lawyer. Once, I was a naive 16-year-old girl, looking at the world with wide-open eyes. Back then, I believed in kindness and honesty, thinking that if you try to be good, everything will surely turn out happy. But life taught me otherwise. Cruelly and mercilessly. Everything changed when my father, Lee Young-sik, a respected businessman and talented financier, was accused of fraud. His reputation was destroyed, the company collapsed, and a few months later, he died under mysterious circumstances. Many believed he took his own life out of despair. The official version said my father was too ashamed before society for the alleged crime. But I never believed he did it voluntarily. Too many questions remained unanswered. No investigator was interested in uncovering the truth. Everyone unanimously ruled the death a suicide. I was just a teenager then, but I understood perfectly well that powerful people stood behind my family's downfall. My heart repeated one name, Min Hyuk. I remember that spoiled boy, the son of the largest corporation owner in the country. We met a few times at social events, and he always looked at me with mockery and condescension. When my father's downfall began, it seemed to me I saw satisfaction on his face, as if someone had successfully carried out his order. Maybe it was just my childish imagination, since I didn't know all the business details back then. But my hatred for him was born at that moment. Years passed, I learned to be strong, and my path led me into the world of law. I diligently mastered laws and procedures, climbed the career ladder, and by the age of 26, I became one of the most promising lawyers in the country. My name commanded respect even from seasoned court veterans. In a close circle, I was called Iron Lee, not because I was harsh or cold-hearted, but because I never gave up. I stubbornly pursued my goal, to uncover the truth about my father's death and restore his good name. Every case I took on was another step toward my still unattainable goals. For years, I collected scraps of information about the past, talked to my father's former colleagues, low-level employees who still remembered that time. I dug through old documents, created charts, calculated who benefited from his downfall. And more often, the name Kang surfaced on my personal map of suspects. But everything hit a dead end due to lack of evidence. No one wanted to stand against such an influential family. Then fate gave me a chance. A loud scandal erupted in the country related to business fraud, and suddenly the Kang Corporation was at the center. Ironically, I was hired on the legal team tasked with participating in the trial against the corporation itself. The client wanted me to conduct interrogations of several high-ranking figures, including the new CEO, Kang Min Hyuk. I couldn't believe that I was finally given the opportunity to face that man on equal terms, in a courtroom, in front of all the honest people. On paper, I was supposed to just conduct the interrogation and clear the client's name, to prove that the Kang Corporation broke the law and would be punished. But in my heart, without a doubt, there was a burning desire for personal revenge. I intended to do everything to make him answer for those 10 years of pain I endured. The morning before the first court hearing was calm, but inside me raged a hurricane. Outside, I remained the same calm, cold-blooded professional my colleagues were used to seeing. I knew I couldn't show my inner trembling. If I let emotions take over, I would lose the whole case. Anger was my secret ally and at the same time my most dangerous enemy. When the clock struck 8, I rose from the leather chair and adjusted my strict skirt. The reflection in the mirror betrayed no sign of nervousness. Impeccable makeup lightly emphasizing my eyes, a strict blouse. I looked as a lawyer should look, one who takes on high-profile cases. But beneath this flawless facade burned the desire to show Kang Min Hyuk that I was no longer the frightened girl. I was someone else. As I left the office, I got a call from my assistant, Park Jun-ho. He informed me that all case materials were ready, the courtroom was scheduled for 10 a.m. and journalists were already waiting at the entrance. I wasn't surprised. The Kang Corporation was a big name, and the press loved scandals. They expected sensational stories from this trial. I sighed, hung up, and stepped out of the law firm building with a firm stride. Through the transparent doors, photographers were already visible, aiming their lenses. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just another high-profile case. For me, it was a personal battle. I anticipated the meeting with Min Hyuk, who had grown from a boy into a dangerous opponent. And though I appeared cold-blooded on the outside, inside me churned determination mixed with fear. I felt the past literally breathing down my neck, demanding resolution of an old drama. The courtroom greeted me with its usual bustle. I tried not to pay attention to the camera flashes and trained my gaze straight ahead. Inside, however, everything tightened into a knot. I felt that any moment I might break down and lose control. But I couldn't afford that. My assistant met me at the door and escorted me to our seats. We took position next to the team of lawyers representing the interests of affected companies and shareholders. The case details were complex. It involved securities fraud and kickbacks on major deals. The information had leaked to the press, and the public demanded harsh punishment for the guilty. I felt dozens of curious eyes digging into my figure from behind. Journalists, other lawyers, mere onlookers, all wanted to see who dared to challenge the Kang family. And I liked the thought that today my words, backed by evidence, would be my main weapon. I glanced around the room. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed a tall figure standing against the opposite wall. He was there with Kang Min Hyuk. I recognized him immediately, though I hadn't seen him for 10 years. Tall, slender, in a perfectly tailored suit, with a cold and focused gaze. I saw no trace of his former carelessness. That boy with a condescending smirk had vanished into the past. Before me stood a composed and dangerous man. Every movement seemed precise, and his gaze was like steel. Our eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, I felt like I was drowning in that cold, emotionless sea. It burned me. I remembered how I once saw contempt and malice in those eyes. But now there was only calm and confidence. He didn't smile or mock, he just looked at me as an object to be carefully examined. The remnants of my childhood resentment surfaced with renewed force. I swallowed, trying not to betray my nervousness. I reminded myself, I'm a professional. And I'm here to do my job, even if it's a very personal one. Are you ready, ma'am? Park Jun-ho's voice sounded beside me. Yes, I answered, turning away from Min Hyuk. Of course, I'm ready. The judge entered the courtroom, and the usual hush fell over the room. The hearing began. The opposing side presented their arguments first, and I listened with a stone face, noting every inaccuracy and inconsistency. My mind feverishly ran through possible questions and counterarguments. When it was my turn, I stood up and, keeping my posture steady, walked to the podium. Min Hyuk's gaze was fixed on me. I even thought he slightly tilted his head to get a better look. I pictured the documents proving several top managers of the Kang Corporation's involvement in illegal schemes. Then, looking him directly in the eye, I said, and in the course of this case, I request to call Kang Min Hyuk as a witness. The silence in the courtroom became almost tangible. I felt the tension begin to rise. No one expected us to try to summon the very CEO of the corporation, the man who had effectively inherited the empire from his father. But I saw some of the opposing lawyers' lips tighten. They understood I had to respond to the challenge. The public resonance was too great to ignore this demand. The judge approved my motion, scheduling the testimony for the next day. In my heart, I felt victorious. Now I could ask any questions. Any questions? Within the process, I had been given the perfect tool to get to the truth about the past. When the recess was announced, I felt my legs trembling from the tension. But I couldn't afford to show weakness. I passed by the tables of the legal teams, trying not to look at them, but I sensed someone's gaze burning me. Lee So-yeon. Someone called my name. I turned around. Kang Min Hyuk stood before me. No one paid attention to his call. They were all too busy with their own matters and phone calls. The courtroom slowly emptied. Only a few people remained. Do we know each other? I said coldly. He frowned slightly. Not harshly, but as if I had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. I think so. No trace of a smile, only impassiveness in his voice. You've taken on a high-profile case against my family. Isn't that a bit presumptuous? He spoke quietly, but there was a detectable threat in his tone. Once, this guy had allowed himself liberties and sarcasm. Now he acted more cautiously, but no less harshly. I'm doing my job, I replied, trying to hide the tremor. And I advise you to get used to the idea that this time you won't be able to buy your way out or hush up the scandal. His gray eyes burned right through me. Min Hyuk tilted his head slightly, as if pondering what to say next. Do you think you know the whole truth? His voice was cold. Are you sure you're on the right side? I wanted to shout everything I'd bottled up for 10 years into his face, grievances, suspicions, pain. But I bit my lip. Professionalism. Cold calm. I know enough, I said. The court will show who is right and who is guilty. I turned and left, carrying with me the wild pounding of my own heart. This was my first confrontation with the person I considered my sworn enemy. And it left too many questions, not just the usual hatred. Why did not only anger churn inside me? Why had some strange trembling arisen just from the sound of his voice? Returning to the office, I felt the tension clutch my shoulders and neck as if I had denied myself a break all day. And that was true. Usually after court, I allowed myself a cup of strong tea to gather my thoughts and make plans for continuing the case. But today, I needed to sort out not only the legal aspects but also my own emotions. So-yeon, are you okay? Park Jun-ho's voice sounded cautiously as he entered my office. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Yes, just a little tired. He nodded and set a folder with documents on the desk. Here are the account statements and contracts. There probably isn't anything we haven't seen yet, but I plan to reread everything carefully. Maybe we'll find contradictions that could help at tomorrow's interrogation of Kang Min Hyuk. I frowned. Yeah, let's do that. If you find any inconsistencies, let me know immediately. Park Jun-ho hesitated a bit, as if wanting to ask something. I had already gotten used to his manner. He was my attentive, caring assistant, but still young. His hesitation always showed in how he twisted his jacket sleeve. Go ahead, I sighed. You get very emotional when you look at him. Maybe because he's the son of that very man. He stopped, realizing he had touched on the topic of my father. I'm just worried that emotions might interfere with handling the case objectively. I was silent for a long time. Of course, he was right. But it was unlikely anything could stop me from seeing it through to the end. I'm a professional, I said softly but firmly. My personal feelings will stay with me. I wanted to believe that was true. That I could control this storm inside. But I wasn't sure. When Park Jun-ho left, I opened the folder and began flipping through the documents, trying to forget Min Hyuk's expression when he asked, "Are you sure you know the whole truth?" That phrase echoed in my mind like a scratched record. What was he after? What were his motives? To distract myself a bit, I decided to focus on the legal part and started systematizing the facts. Colored stickers, tables, diagrams were put to use. Deep inside, I knew, If I could find a direct link between Min Hyuk and the financial fraud, I could expose him not only as a businessman but also drag the whole truth about what happened 10 years ago into the light. I flipped through old archives about my father's death, collected over the years. There were photocopies of police reports, conclusions about suicide. But it all seemed superficial. Nothing concrete, only circumstantial evidence pointed to the Kang family's involvement. I remembered that ill-fated day when my father was taken away by the police. I was 16, sitting on the stairs in shock, watching him being handcuffed. No, he didn't resist, he was just crushed by the news that he was accused of fraud. Reporters shouted offensive questions, camera flashes blinded our eyes. I just froze, unable to understand how a life could collapse in one evening. Later, my father tried to defend himself, wrote official letters to courts, protested, but no one listened. Two powerful enemies stood against him. A few months later, his death, mysterious and cruel, which everyone wrote off as suicide. That night something inside me broke. I vowed not to give up and to do everything to restore his good name. And now I was close to getting answers. For a moment, I allowed myself to close my eyes and remember my father's face, warm, kind. He always said I should follow my dream and never lose my conscience. Suddenly I felt a chill in my chest, realizing that over the years my dream had turned into a single thirst for revenge. Was there anything in me besides this vengeance? The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. An unknown name appeared on the screen. I answered automatically. Hello? Lee So-yeon? A male voice on the other end sounded sharp and clipped. I wanted to talk about your father. My heart dropped into my stomach. Who are you? It doesn't matter. I know he didn't commit fraud, and I know the name of the person who set it all up. I stood up, swallowing hard, my lips dry. What? Repeat that again. I have documents. If you want to get them, come tonight at 9 to the bar Bitter Revelation. Come alone. After those words, the connection was lost. I stood holding the phone, my heart pounding as if I had just run a marathon. Maybe it was another trick or provocation, but hope pierced me like a bright arrow. If this person really had proof of my father's innocence, I had to check it out. But what if it was a trap? I knew how dangerous it was to trust anonymous sources. Still, an unquenchable thirst for the truth lived inside me. After so many years, I had learned caution, but sometimes you have to take risks. I took out my phone and sent a brief message to Park Young-ho, meeting tonight. Place, Bitter Revelation Bar. Stay in sight but don't show yourself. If anything goes wrong, act. A minute later, I got a short understood in response. I looked at the clock again. There were still several hours before evening, so I decided to go home and change into something less conspicuous. A nervous chill ran through me with anticipation. Maybe tonight I would find the link that would lead me to the truth behind the tragedy. The Bitter Revelation Bar was located in a neighborhood where decent citizens usually did not venture without urgent need. I arrived there by modest taxi, deliberately leaving my personal car behind to avoid attention. Changing into ordinary jeans and a jacket, I hoped I wouldn't look like a lawyer from a fancy office. When I entered, a wave of loud music, cigarette smoke, and the smell of cheap alcohol hit me. Dim neon lights illuminated the colorful patrons. I scanned the faces, hoping to find someone who would give a sign. No one paid me special attention, which was actually better. I took a seat at the bar and pretended to study the drink list. Doubt still flickered in my mind, maybe it was a trap. But if there was even the slightest chance to restore the truth about my father, I couldn't let it slip. About 10 minutes passed when a man in a cap and worn denim jacket sat beside me. He glanced at me briefly and quietly said, "Lee So-yeon?" "Yes," I replied just as quietly, trying to look calm. "Let's go find a quieter table." I followed him to a far corner where the lighting was barely enough. We sat at a rickety table, and he lowered his eyes as if afraid of being recognized. "I don't have much time," he whispered. My name is Choi Dong-wook. I used to work in the police and handled your father's case. I froze. This man seemed to be telling the truth. I remembered his name from the list of investigators, but back then he was only an assistant. Why did you decide to tell me everything now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He lowered his head. Because back then, I was forced to keep quiet. I started digging deeper, trying to find out who really wanted your father overthrown. But I was sidelined, and later forced to leave the police altogether. Since then, I've been in hiding, scraping by with odd jobs, trying to forget. But I got tired of living with guilt. And you're ready to give me proof that my father was innocent? Yes. But the problem is, the documents aren't with me. After I was fired, I handed all the copies to someone, hoping he would handle them properly. But that person disappeared. I know how to find him. He didn't finish. Something flickered in the dim light, and I heard a dull thud. Choi Dong-wook suddenly grabbed his side and groaned in pain, and I saw a dark stain spreading beneath his arm. Damn! I exclaimed as I realized he had been stabbed. Everything happened in seconds. A shadow slipped past, disappearing into the crowd. I screamed, trying to get help, but the loud music drowned out my voice. Grabbing my purse, I pulled out my phone, but it slipped from my hands as the offended patrons started pushing each other. Choi Dong-wook. I tried to hold him up so he wouldn't fall from the stool. Hold on, I'll call an ambulance. But he shook his head, his gaze growing increasingly dim. Listen. To me. He whispered, squeezing out words with blood. Find Park Sung-ju. It's important. His body went limp, and I realized he was losing consciousness. Panicked, I turned to the bartender, shouting for help. Finally, people noticed something was wrong. Several men jumped up to help. Someone called an ambulance. The bar plunged into chaos. With trembling hands, I tried to stop the bleeding, but the wound was too deep. I didn't know if he would survive until the doctors arrived, but I kept pressing the napkins to his side, whispering, "Hold on, hold on." When the ambulance finally arrived and took him away, I barely stayed on my feet. One thought raced through my mind: someone didn't want the truth to come out. Choi Dong-wook had only given me one name, Park Sung-ju. Maybe it was the only thread leading to the solution. I was angry at myself for not anticipating an attack. And angry at the unknown assailant who almost killed a witness. I ran out into the dark night. My phone was still somewhere on the bar floor, but I didn't care. I looked stunned, covered in blood that had soaked through my jacket sleeve. Then I noticed a black car by the curb. The door was slightly open, and I saw a familiar stern gaze. It was Kang Min Hyuk. I froze, not understanding why he was there. My heart pounded wildly, fear and hatred mixed into a dizzying storm. "Get in," he said shortly. "I'll take you somewhere safe." "What? What are you doing here?" I gasped, unable to hide my surprise. He didn't answer, only raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Now's not the time for questions." At that moment, I heard a gunshot behind me. A bullet whistled, shattering glass near me. I flinched in terror. "Damn, hurry!" Min Hyuk shouted, pulling me out of the line of fire. I immediately jumped into his car. The vehicle sped off, and we rushed into the night. I held my trembling hands to my chest, trying in vain to calm the adrenaline. What on earth was happening here? We raced down empty streets, and I was torn by contradictions. My whole life had been devoted to punishing Kang Min Hyuk. And now, it turned out, he was saving my life? How and why was he at that bar? My mind refused to make sense of it all, and my heart still hammered with fear. But one thing I understood clearly: someone had just tried to kill me, and I only escaped thanks to the intervention of the man I considered my greatest enemy. Why? The relentless question beat in my head. Why did he do this? And why did his presence suddenly feel both terrifying and strangely reassuring? We stopped at a luxurious hotel complex, where a guard immediately opened the automatic gates when the car arrived. I sat silently, goosebumps creeping over my skin not from the cold, but from the realization that I was near Kang Min Hyuk. He drove along the hotel's inner driveway, then stopped in front of one of the buildings. "Let's go," he commanded shortly, getting out of the car. I was still in shock, with dried blood on my jacket sleeve. With slightly trembling legs, I got out, trying not to think about what I was doing. Imagine, I was with him. And he was leading me to a place that seemed safe. The main lobby looked empty, as if we were the only guests. Apparently, Min Hyuk had rented the entire building or had special privileges here. The guard on duty in the corner respectfully lowered his eyes at the sight of the boss. No one questioned why I was covered in blood. We took the elevator to the top floor, and finally, breaking the silence, I asked, What's going on? Why are you here?" He stood next to me, arms crossed over his chest. Up close, I could see how different he was from the boy I remembered. He had been handsome back then, but in a bold, pretentious way. Now his features seemed carved from stone, and his gaze held maturity. "Someone tried to kill you," he said dryly, not answering directly. "And it wasn't me who arranged it, in case you thought so." I pressed my lips together. So many questions swirled on my tongue. Why did he save me? We stepped out of the elevator into a corridor, and Min Hyuk led me to a door. Inside was a suite, furnished like a separate apartment, a living room, bedroom, kitchen. "Take off your jacket," he ordered. "There's blood on it." I obeyed automatically, since the sleeve was soaked with Choi Dong-wook's blood. A lump rose in my throat at the memory. Was he alive now? Maybe I had run away for nothing, but after the shot fired at me, I just couldn't stay put. "Go to the bathroom, wash up, get yourself together," Min Hyuk said, noticing my confusion. "Then we'll talk." I entered the luxurious bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my hair disheveled, and there was a fingerprint on my cheek. I pulled off my jacket and sweater, checked my hands. Luckily, there was no blood of my own, but the stains of another shook me to the core. I washed my hands reflexively, trying to scrub off the brownish marks. But washing away the guilt and fear wasn't so easy. Several times I splashed cold water on my face, trying to stop the trembling. Who could have attacked me and killed the man who was about to reveal the truth about my father? Was this some conspiracy so powerful it posed a physical threat to me? And why had Kang Min Hyuk suddenly taken my side? When I left the bathroom, I saw a cup of hot tea waiting on the coffee table. Min Hyuk noticed me and nodded toward the armchair. "Sit down. We need to talk." I took a seat, lowering my gaze to the cup where the fragrant drink rippled gently. "Thank you," I said quietly, trying to be polite somehow. He sat opposite me, crossing one leg over the other. I noted how confidently he looked anywhere, as if this luxurious suite were an extension of his very essence. "You probably think I'm the enemy," he began, "and you have every reason to think so. 10 years ago, our family did quite a few things. Things to regret." I tensed, so he admitted it. "But I never betrayed you," he added firmly, as if that alone should soothe my hatred. "My father was framed," I blurted out, cursing the tremor in my voice. "And I'm sure the Kang family was involved." He sighed, and suddenly something like regret flashed in his eyes. But it was so quick that I wasn't sure if I imagined it. "It's not as simple as it seems," he finally said. "Yes, my father was involved in dirty deals, and maybe your father was mixed up in them too. But that doesn't mean our family orchestrated this whole thing. Sometimes there are even more powerful forces interested in pitting people against each other to cover up their own schemes." I listened but didn't rush to believe him. For a long time, my hatred had a face, the face of the young Kang Min Hyuk laughing at my family. "Fine," I said. "Suppose it's not so straightforward. But then, if you know the truth, why were you silent all these years? I was a child, he snapped. Yes, spoiled, arrogant, but not in control. All decisions were made by my father. Then when I started digging, I found only fragments of information. Then he had a heart attack. I inherited a corporation with a huge network of connections and secret deals. I still don't control everything. I swallowed hard, trying to absorb his words. Intellectually, I understood he could be telling the truth. How could a minor heir have real influence over his father's business empire? But my feelings refused to accept that explanation. The pain was too fresh. I had shed too many tears. Okay, I repeated again. But why did you pull me out of that bar? How did you know I would be there? Min Hyuk looked away, as if debating whether to tell the truth. When I heard you were hired to work against the Com Corporation, I decided you might be followed by people who'd lose out. I wasn't sure if you were connected to any of my rivals or criminal groups, but I suspected you'd dig into the past. And, as it happens, I was right. You were watching me? Indignation flared instantly. I asked my people to keep an eye on you. He looked at me openly, without embarrassment. And when I got word you went to a suspicious place, I got worried. I didn't think it would go this far, but I decided to come personally to make sure you were okay. I sipped my tea to hide how dry my throat had become. The tension hadn't gone away, but at the same time, I realized without his intervention, I might have been killed. Thank you, I finally forced out, feeling the words scrape my throat. It was hard to thank someone I blamed for all my troubles. You're welcome, he answered calmly. But don't think this means friendship. We're still on opposite sides of the barricades. I'm sure, I smirked. Tomorrow at the court hearing, I'll do everything so your corporation pays in full. His lips twitched in a brief smile, as if expecting just that answer. Do what you must, he said. Just know, if you keep digging, you might run into people who won't stop at anything. Our eyes met. A wave of emotion surged inside me, outrage, anger, and also a strange feeling that before me was no longer a boy, but a grown man with great power and a secret behind him. I won't back down, I said stubbornly. My goal is to reveal the truth. I like that, he said quietly, almost whispering. Your persistence. Your resolve. I've always admired that in people. He looked at me in such a way that my heart suddenly clenched betrayingly. A memory floated before my eyes, those days when we were teenagers, and I saw him only from afar, handsome, confident, surrounded by friends. I remember thinking then that he was different, not like us ordinary mortals. But now I saw a man who could protect. And that thought made me even more nervous. I looked away, trying to suppress the chaos of feelings. I need to go home, I said finally. Tomorrow is an important day. Stay here tonight, he unexpectedly offered. It's safer than your apartment. If they want to get to you, you'll be an easy target at home. I jumped up, unwilling to admit he was right. I didn't want to depend on him even for a second. But the thought that my enemies might find me by address sent a chill down my spine. Don't be afraid, he added, standing. I'm not going to hold you here. Just offering a safe place. Our eyes met again, and I suddenly realized hatred couldn't shield me from reality. Someone really wanted to kill me, and I had no guarantee they wouldn't try again. All right, I swallowed my pride and agreed. I'll stay. But on one condition, I corrected myself. I want a separate room. He smiled slightly at the corner of his mouth. Of course. For several seconds we stood exchanging looks. For the first time in many years, this was not just a duel of hatred, but something subtler, underlying. I quickly looked away, feeling my resolve waver where it should have been unshakable. They showed me the bedroom. Left alone, I finally caught my breath. I took off my dirty clothes, locked myself in the bathroom, and stood under the hot shower for a long time, washing away not only the blood but the obsession. I thought about how close I had come to the edge, seeing the wounded Choi Dong-wook and hearing the shot. When I lay down on the wide, soft bed, chaos raged inside me. I understood that someday I would have to sort out my contradictions toward this man who was now in the next room. But right now, I was too exhausted. My eyes were closing on their own, and sleep chained me to the bed. In a half-dream, I saw a hand pulling me out from under a bullet, and a quiet voice whispering, "Are you sure you know the whole truth?" The next morning, I woke up feeling shattered, as if I had barely slept. Looking at the clock, I realized there was very little time left before the hearing started. I had to conduct the interrogation of Kang Min Hyuk, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't avoid facing him in the courtroom. A quick glance around the room reminded me where I was. The suite was dim, heavy curtains were drawn, but sunlight filtered through a crack. I got up, quickly dressed in my sharp suit that Min Hyuk's staff had brought me presumably on his orders. The feeling of awkwardness pierced me again. I was accepting help from someone I had considered an enemy all my life. And all those attentions weighed on my mind. Kang Min Hyuk himself met me in the living room. He was already dressed to the nines, a flawless dark gray suit, white shirt, and tie. Seeing me, he only nodded briefly. "We need to go to court." "If you're ready." "Yes," I tried to speak coldly to hide my inner turmoil. "Let's go." There was tense silence in the car. I looked out the window, and he drove focused, not even trying to start a conversation. Still, I felt his presence every moment, as if there wasn't enough air inside the cabin for two. When we arrived at the courthouse, I was the first to get out and hurried toward the service entrance, avoiding the journalists. But, as luck would have it, they were already gathered there. Apparently someone from the hotel staff had leaked that the famous lawyer Lee So-yeon had spent the night with Kang Min Hyuk. Photographers almost climbed on me, shouting provocative questions. "So-yeon, is it true you conspired with Kang Min Hyuk? You came together. Are you in a relationship? How will this affect the case?" I tried to stay calm, but inside everything was burning with humiliation. The crowd noise was deafening. Journalists like wild animals tried to tear apart our private lives. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, I sharply pushed away the microphone shoved in my face and shouted, "Please, do not block the way. I am not giving any comments." At that moment, Min Hyuk stepped up behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, slightly shielding me from the intrusive photographers. He said something to his bodyguards, who then pushed the reporters aside, forming a corridor through which we entered the building. My heart was pounding, and the very thought that I, a lawyer, had to be shielded by this man was maddening. Finally, we found ourselves in the courthouse hallway where a businesslike hush prevailed. I shook his hand off my shoulder, trying to look independent. "I can take care of myself," I said coldly. "Of course," he replied calmly, without a trace of irritation. I turned away and walked toward my team of lawyers. Pak Jun-ho immediately rushed to me. "God, So-yeon, where have you been? Your phone didn't answer." I was worried. "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said wearily. "I'll tell you later." "Has it started already?" I nodded toward the courtroom door. "Almost," he replied, handing me a folder with documents. I prepared the questions we wanted to ask Kang Min Hyuk. "Good." I glanced briefly toward the defense side. There stood Min Hyuk himself, surrounded by his legal team, not even looking in my direction. His face showed impassive readiness for anything. A few minutes later, we were called into the courtroom. The hearing was at a stage where, as the representative of the injured party, I was granted the right to interrogate key figures. Kang Min Hyuk was testifying, but in fact, everything indicated that he could become one of the main defendants if we proved his involvement. "Mr. Kang Min Hyuk," I began, "you have held the position of CEO of Kang Group Corporation for 3 years, correct?" "Yes," he answered evenly. "During this time, there have been several transactions that raise suspicions of fraud." I read out several points. "Can you explain why your company conducted transactions with an intermediary who had no official license?" "Our lawyers have already explained. We conducted an audit and found that the license was forged." As soon as we discovered the discrepancy, cooperation was terminated, he explained with the same calm voice. I nodded, flipping through papers. Next question. It is known that you signed the order to acquire a controlling stake in Taeyong Limited, which became involved in a capital outflow financial scheme. Why did you not take timely measures to prevent this scheme? I was not aware of Taeyong Limited's real intentions, he answered. They were presented to me as a promising company. After the fraud was uncovered, I attempted to hold their management accountable, but unfortunately, the legal process dragged on. His answers sounded confident, precise, and well-prepared. I understood that catching him off guard would not be easy. He came ready for any question. But I was not one to give up easily. Still, Mr. Can, I paused, don't you find it strange that such large-scale fraud could occur inside the corporation without your knowledge? My corporation is very large, he said calmly. I have many deputies and departments running their own projects. Unfortunately, sometimes individual employees exploit loopholes. But we do everything possible to identify and punish offenders. I pretended to check the papers, so, you claim you were unaware of the violations, correct? Exactly. Understood, I raised an eyebrow. Then tell me, are you familiar with the name Park Sung-ju? For a moment, Min Hyuk's face cracked slightly in his impassive mask. Maybe I was mistaken, but it seemed he was surprised. He tensed slightly, clenching his jaw. No, he answered after a short pause. I don't recall. I felt a sting of disappointment. I had no evidence linking him to a man named Park Sung-ju, whom the unfortunate Choi Dong-wook had mentioned to me. But I still hoped that just mentioning the name would provoke some reaction. Min Hyuk's gaze flickered with caution, but outwardly he still looked confident. Then I'll clarify, I said, perhaps your documents mention. I pretended to search the papers to buy time and draw the court's attention to his reaction. Okay, we'll return to this question later. I continued asking him questions about other episodes. His answers were logical and well-constructed. The corporation's lawyers sitting nearby nodded and took notes. I realized that in this format, breaking through his defense armor was extremely difficult. I needed facts I didn't have yet. All I had was the name Park Sung-ju, suspicion that a more serious organization was behind my case, and memories of my father's death. After an hour of interrogation, the judge declared a recess so the parties could present additional materials. I sank onto the bench next to Park Jun-ho, feeling the tension inside me rise. I hadn't fully cornered Kang Min Hyuk despite all my efforts. We won't win the case if we don't find additional evidence. I shook my head, eyes fixed on Min Hyuk, who was talking with his lawyers. I know, sighed Park Jun-ho, but we tried to get access to his personal accounts and found nothing overtly suspicious. All transactions are properly documented. I was silent, considering options. My feelings were torn. Part of me was angry that he so deftly avoided responsibility. Another part desperately tried to see if there was truth in his words about being caught in the system's trap. After the hearing, I headed to the judge's office for the formalities, and once I finished, I stepped out into the corridor. Reporters were already rushing to the exit, chasing sensational headlines, and the lawyers were dispersing as well. I was about to call a taxi and go back to the office when I suddenly spotted a familiar silhouette. Kang Min Hyuk was standing by the window, watching me, clearly waiting. Again? I asked sharply as I approached him. Decided to follow me not only at night but in broad daylight too? He ignored my sarcasm and replied calmly, we need to talk. About what? I crossed my arms. About Park Sung-ju, he said quietly. I shuddered, remembering how during the interrogation he claimed he didn't know that name. Now, clearly, he had something on his mind. I quickly glanced around. The corridor was almost empty, only a couple of clerks had passed by without paying us any attention. So you do know who she is? I asked tensely. He pressed his lips together as if considering how to phrase his words. I can't talk here, he finally said. Let's go, get in the car. I'll explain everything there. No, I cut him off. Let's find a neutral place. I don't want rumors about us to start again. Min Hyuk squinted but eventually nodded. All right. I know a cafe nearby. Let's go. I followed him outside, trying to keep some distance. The events of the past day had shaken me. It felt like the tension between us had turned much more personal. When we arrived at a small cafe in a quiet alley, I noted how secluded it was. We took a table in the corner, and a waitress brought us some water. Now speak, I demanded, folding my arms on the table. Park Seon-ju is someone who once worked on the side of, let's say, a competing group. They dealt with anonymous investors, helped launder money. He began without taking his eyes off mine. It seems she, a woman, to be precise, had access to materials related to the activities of your father and mine. My father? I felt a chill. So he knew too? I don't know all the details. But if you trust indirect evidence, your father somehow cooperated with this group, perhaps without even realizing their true nature. And when everything came to light, both my father and yours were framed. Someone cleverly set them against each other and removed them both from the path. I gripped the edge of the table, my heart pounding wildly. You mean? My voice trembled. My father was just used? But I saw how they accused him of terrible crimes. Yes, he answered bitterly. Your father was naive about some things. Or he was threatened. I don't know yet, he admitted. But the idea that his death was the result of a conspiracy seems more and more likely. I sat in shock, feeling the ground give way beneath me. My understanding of the past was collapsing before my eyes. I had thought the Kang family was the main cause of my father's death. But it turned out there was some other invisible force. Then why did everyone accuse only your family? I asked, hiding my trembling. Why didn't you prove there was someone else behind it all? He lowered his gaze. I repeat, I was just a child then. When I grew up and started investigating, it was already too late. All traces were covered, witnesses disappeared. Now I'm trying to figure out who's behind it, but without success. In any case, I began, trying to steady my voice, I can't just trust you like that. I have no proof. I'll give you a contact, he said, pulling a card from his inner pocket. This is my private line where we can exchange information. If you find evidence that pushes us toward the truth, I'll be ready to examine it. I took the card and automatically read the number, no name or logo on it. I see, I exhaled. But keep in mind, my goal is to find the truth and punish the guilty. And if in the end it turns out you're involved too, I won't spare you. He smirked slightly. I don't expect mercy. And by the way, I don't want to hurt you. What happened last night proves it. I wouldn't have saved someone I planned to destroy. Yes, it was hard to deny. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling he was holding something back. All right, I concluded. We're not allies, but not enemies either. You could say that, he nodded. At least until we find the real culprits. I felt a slight weight lift off my shoulders. But the inner turmoil remained. The words "the price of forgiveness is too high" came to mind. Could I ever forgive this man? And did I want to? I didn't know. For now, it was important to figure out who really destroyed my father. We paid and stepped out onto the street. The day was sunny, which felt absurd given our dark secrets. As I was about to call a taxi, Min Hyuk stepped closer, and I felt his warmth again, both frightening and alluring. Take my car, he offered. I can call another one for myself. I'll manage, I said with my usual cold tone. All right, he tilted his head slightly. See you at the next hearing. I stood watching him leave. Every cell in my body trembled with contradictions. Why did his gaze make me feel both anger and a strange excitement at the same time? Was I really that weak? Giving myself a mental order, don't you dare fall in love with the enemy, I called a taxi and went to the office to bury myself in work. The case couldn't wait, and the people behind the attempt might already be planning their next move. I had no right to let myself slip. But the memory of his voice and that special look haunted me. Days passed, and I tried to keep the case moving at a normal pace, but everyone thought I was strengthening my position against the Kang family. Meanwhile, I started asking around among police contacts, trying to find any information about Park Seon-ju. No one knew where she was, but persistent rumors said she belonged to a shadowy group involved in dirty operations for years. If she was connected to the past tragedy, she might know the truth. One evening, after working late at the office, there was a knock at the door. It was nearly 10 o'clock, most staff had left, but I was still studying reports. To my surprise, Kang Min Hyuk appeared in the doorway. His presence made me tense. We'd only met at court or in safe public places before. Why had he come here, at such an hour? Did something happen? I asked, trying to contain my anxiety. He came in and closed the door behind him. There was worry in his eyes. I got word, the people behind the bar assassination attempt haven't backed down. They have another witness in their sights. And you might be in danger if you keep looking for Park Seon-ju. I can't stop, I said firmly, standing up. I have to get to the truth. I understand, he shook his head. But they play hardball. You need to be extremely careful. I noticed him glancing around subtly, as if making sure we were alone. Suddenly, the air in the room thickened with tension. He stepped closer, and I felt that familiar flutter again. Why do you care about me so much? I blurted out. I could still damage your corporation. Or even help get you arrested. He stepped closer by another step. We were now just half a meter apart. I saw his eyes searching mine, trying to read what I felt inside. If the truth is on your side, I'll accept the consequences, he said quietly. But I don't want anything irreparable to happen to you. You're too important. My heart skipped a beat. Too important? I should have laughed in his face, told him I didn't believe him. But the word stuck in my throat. Why? Maybe his closeness worked like a spell. Min Hyuk. I whispered, forgetting formalities for a moment. And he, as if sensing this impulse, grabbed my hand and pulled me to him. It all happened suddenly. I barely resisted. His lips covered mine in a swift, heated kiss. It was an explosion of feelings mixed with long-buried hatred and unconscious desire. My mind rebelled. What are you doing? He's your enemy. But my body responded with a heat I couldn't suppress. I don't remember who made the next move, but soon we were pressed against the wall of my office. I felt strong hands holding me as if I could vanish. I dug my fingers into his shoulders, breathing greedily. Hatred and passion collided in my veins, driving me mad. God, what are we doing? I breathed out as I broke away from his lips for a moment. I don't understand it either, he admitted, breathing heavily. But I can't stop. Words faded, and we melted into a kiss again. His hand slid under my blouse. I shivered from the goosebumps racing over my skin. My mind screamed that this was wrong, but inside me awoke a suppressed part that had been bound by loneliness and thirst for revenge for years. Now, under his touch, I suddenly felt a craving for warmth and closeness, even if it was closeness with someone I once saw as the embodiment of evil. When he lifted me and sat me on the edge of the desk, I no longer thought about stopping. His hand slid over my hips, and I felt the last remnants of self-control crack. He looked at me with the same wild desire burning with something primal. Clutching his hair with my fingers, I parted my lips, letting out horse breaths. When it was over, we sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. My head rested on his shoulder, and my heart pounded wildly. I closed my eyes, realizing into what abyss I had fallen. And what now? Sorry. He whispered quietly, stroking my hair. I shouldn't have. No, I shook my head. We both did. Guilt and fear stirred in my soul. After all, I had sworn to take revenge, and now I gave myself to him in a passionate impulse. But was I really that weak? Or is it just human nature to seek warmth, even if it comes from someone you consider your enemy? He helped me up, and we straightened ourselves. I looked disheveled, my hair tousled, lips swollen from his kisses. But inside, a hurricane raged. I need to think, I whispered, looking away. I understand, he nodded, lowering his hand. I won't pressure you. Just be careful, okay? I only nodded silently, and he left the office, leaving me alone. I sank into my chair and covered my face with my hands, not understanding what was happening to me. For the first time in 10 years, my confidence wavered. But the scariest thing was that I wanted to feel his touch again and again, as if I couldn't get enough. That frightened me more than any threat from killers. The next morning, I barely gathered my thoughts so as not to look defeated. A new round of court awaited me, but my mind wasn't there. Inside, everything burned with memories of Min Hyuk's touches and with fear that it had been a colossal mistake. Yet, as soon as I stepped into the courtroom, I transformed back into Iron Lee. Wearing a strict suit, sharpening my expression, I took my place. Today, I was preparing a motion to summon several experts who could confirm the facts of corruption by the Com Corporation. But when the judge asked if there were any additional witnesses, the door opened, and a woman of about 40 with a dull gaze entered. She was accompanied by a public defender. It turned out she was Park Song-ju. My heart pounded, so she had been found after all? I glanced at Min Hyuk, who seemed equally stunned. He hadn't expected her to appear voluntarily. Or was this his secret plan? Park Song-ju took the witness stand. The judge, looking at the lawyer, asked what they wanted to declare. I am ready to testify about the money laundering involving the Com Corporation, the woman said quietly. But not only them. There's another organization running many illegal operations in the country. And I heard a story that completely changed the case. It turned out that the Com Corporation was just the tip of the iceberg, and the real puppeteers hid behind a network of front companies. According to Park Song-ju, these people initially used Min Hyuk's father and my father by giving them fake investments. As soon as the fraud surfaced, both were suspected, while the true puppeteers vanished into the shadows. My father, judging by the documents, wanted to back out of dubious deals but was framed. His death wasn't a suicide either. I listened with tears filling my eyes. This was the confession I had craved for 10 years. Park Song-ju confirmed my father had tried to expose the criminal scheme but didn't make it. He was eliminated. The Com family bore their own responsibility but were also bound hand and foot by this powerful group. The judge ordered all materials to be handed over to the prosecutor's office for further investigation. I stood there, barely breathing. This meant the case was taking on new dimensions. My father would finally be rehabilitated. But what about Kang Min Hyuk? Park Song-ju claimed he didn't know these details, as he was too young and later took control of the corporation without full information. After the hearing, journalists were shocked and swarmed Park Song-ju with thousands of questions. I stepped outside, trying to process what I'd heard. There, on the courthouse steps, Min Hyuk caught up with me. "You got the answers," he said, and I couldn't read his emotions, relief or fear. "Yes." I bit my lip. My father was innocent of the crimes attributed to him. But he... "I know," he answered softly. "I'm sorry." I turned to him. I wanted to say I wouldn't forgive him, but the look on his face, reflecting genuine pain, confused me. "You suffered too," I breathed out. "I saw your eyes when Park Song-ju told how your father was just a pawn in this game." "He wasn't an angel," Min Hyuk smiled bitterly. "But not the devil many thought him to be." We looked at each other under the bright sun, a pause filled with a decade of hostility and misunderstanding between us. And I remembered that night in the office, when we forgot everything and surrendered to passion. What now? What do we do when the truth begins to clear? I started, but a phone ringing interrupted us. My assistant said the prosecutor's office was calling me to an urgent meeting about new evidence. I nodded at Min Hyuk, not knowing how to end the conversation, and hurried away. The whole day passed in a whirlwind of official meetings, papers, statements, interviews. But thoughts of him did not leave me. And our last evening, that flash of passion. Was it really just a mistake? Weeks passed. The investigation grew. Park Song-ju testified against powerful shadow figures, and thanks to this, the prosecutor's office dropped some charges against the Kang Corporation, especially Min Hyuk. Still, his reputation suffered, and his family company was now under strict state supervision. I finally achieved official recognition of my father's innocence. The revealed documents confirmed he was a victim of a conspiracy. His name began to be restored in business circles, though no one could bring him back to life. One evening, as I was returning home, a familiar voice called out, "So-yeon." I turned. Kang Min Hyuk stood at my doorstep, in casual clothes, without his usual cold mask. There was a quiet fire in his eyes. "I didn't want to meet you anymore," I admitted honestly, bitterly smiling. "Understand, So-yeon, I was part of this world. I lived in it, ate at the table with my father, but I hated it as much as you did. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. And if I told you, you'd never believe me." I looked at him. And suddenly I realized, for the first time in all these years, I was not looking at an enemy, but at a person. At someone who, like me, got stuck in the past. Just on the other side of a broken wall. "Why didn't you tell me everything from the start?" He sighed, lowering his head. "Because I was afraid you would leave. That if you found out everything and forgave me, there would be no reason left for you to stay." I stepped closer. "And you want me to stay?" He looked at me. There was no icy wall in his eyes. Only pain. Fatigue. Hope. "I want you to be near. Not because I saved you. Not because I'm guilty. But because, if anything between us was real, let it be a beginning, not an end." My tears fell, and I buried my face in his chest. He embraced me, holding me gently. Perhaps, for the first time in many years, I felt that I had someone to lean on. And though our path began with hatred and pain, maybe that is the meaning of life, to go through darkness in order to find the light. "I'm scared," I whispered, not pulling away. He gently ran his hand through my hair. "Me too. Let's try to face it together. And even if trials await us, even if we don't know if we'll make it, I will choose to start living again, with the one I once wanted to destroy. After all, there is no greater power than forgiveness, even if it took a whole 10 years.